Last summer, I decided to tackle a large section of the Appalachian Trail. I've always loved hiking, especially solo trips. My plan was simple: leave my car at the end of the section, get a ride to the trailhead, and hike back over a little more than a week and a half. At the time, it seemed pretty straightforward. The first few days went smoothly, just as I expected. The trail was everything I had dreamed of: endless stretches of towering trees and winding paths through serene landscapes. I'm in good shape, so I don't have to stop frequently when hiking. Obviously, I wasn't going to hike in the dark, so each night I set up a tent to rest. I've always preferred to keep a low profile, especially since solo hikers can attract attention. That's why I would move a bit off the trail to set up my camp each night. I thought it was better this way, minimizing the chance of a stranger stumbling upon my camp. Until the third night, everything was perfectly fine. However, what I'm about to share is the reason I'm taking a long break from hiking or any kind of wilderness exploration. I woke up in the middle of with a strange feeling that something was wrong. It was that kind of gut feeling you can't explain, but you know you shouldn't ignore. I looked around my tent, and everything seemed normal inside, so I decided to check the camp. I grabbed my rifle, took a flashlight, and opened the tent. There was no one outside, at least no one I could see. I went back into my tent and started checking my backpack. That's when I realized my wallet was missing. At first, I thought I had simply lost it, maybe left it outside the tent or buried it somewhere in my gear. But after checking everything, it was clear someone had taken it. My personal information, cash, credit cards, everything. How was that possible? Had someone entered my tent just to steal that and then left? It seemed unlikely, but losing it randomly was very uncharacteristic of me. I came to the unfortunate conclusion that I had probably lost it myself. However, things only got worse from there. In the following days, I started noticing more things missing. Small, seemingly random items like one of my lighters, my Swiss knife, and some energy bars. I knew I wasn't just losing everything. Someone was stealing my belongings. Part of me didn't want to believe it, but by the fourth day, it was undeniable. I was being stalked. There was no cell coverage in that part of the trail, so I couldn't alert anyone about my situation. I remember contemplating the idea of turning back, but it would only save me a couple of days at most. There was no way I could hike in either direction without sleeping, but I didn't feel comfortable setting up a tent in those woods, with someone literally stalking me. It was a no-win situation. I stayed calm and reminded myself there was a reason I had brought my rifle. Then it hit me. Why hadn't that person stolen my weapon? It was almost as if they were deliberately toying with me. That night, I tied my tent from the inside, hoping it would keep them out if they returned. I tried to stay awake as long as possible, but eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. My plan worked because when I woke up the next morning, there were no signs anyone had been in my tent. By then, paranoia had fully set in. The solitude was affecting my mind, and every second of hiking was agonizing. I don't have anxiety, nor have I ever had it, but let me tell you, I've never felt worse in my life than in the days that followed. Just imagine being in my position, with no options but to keep walking, despite knowing someone is lurking not far away. The anxiety was constant, and I was falling apart. I can't explain why or how, but my mind started playing tricks on me. A whisper in the bushes turned out to be nothing, and a flickering shadow at the edge of my vision disappeared as soon as I turned my head. The hallucinations got worse. I remember most of them, but the one that stands out the most is this. While walking, I felt like I stepped into an ankle-deep puddle of water that almost made me trip. I literally heard the splash and felt the cold water soaking my sock, but when I looked down, the ground was completely dry. I stood there in complete shock. It felt so real. I had no choice but to keep going on the trail. As bad as the days were, the nights were always worse. I tied my tent and slept next to my rifle, but nothing made the anxiety go away. At one point, I had to splash cold water on my face to calm down. The hallucinations subsided after that, but I'm not sure what I would have done if they had continued. The next night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps around my camp. I silently grabbed my rifle, ready to confront whoever was there, but my body was frozen with fear. Eventually, the footsteps faded into the forest, but there was no way I could sleep after that. As soon as the sun rose, I frantically packed up the camp, my hands shaking so much that I could barely tie my gear. I couldn't stay there another night. I was so close, probably a day and a quarter's hike from my car, maybe less if I moved quickly. I decided I wouldn't stop to sleep that night and would push on to get off that damn trail as fast as possible. I hiked for hours as fast as my body would allow. When the sun began to set, I gritted my teeth and continued instead of stopping to set up my tent. By the time it was completely dark, I was very close, probably 2 hours at most. I kept walking, flashlight in one hand and rifle in the other. I started to doubt my decision. I had never hiked in the dark before and wasn't prepared for how difficult it was. That alone was terrifying enough. I pressed on, trying to keep my breathing steady. About an hour passed, I was getting closer, and then I heard it. Somewhere behind me, I was sure I heard footsteps. I turned and pointed my flashlight, and to my horror, I saw something slip behind a tree. Adrenaline took over, and I aimed my rifle at the tree. I loudly demanded they come out. The figure stepped forward. It was definitely a human, but when I tell you it was the most barbaric thing I'd ever seen, I'm not exaggerating. They wore nothing but a pair of my shorts, which I hadn't even realized were missing. Their skin was scratched in several places, and their face was covered in hair. They started walking toward me, even with my rifle pointed at them. Before I could think, I fired a warning shot to their side. They jumped at the sound and instantly retreated, running back into the forest. I was in shock. Without wasting another second, I turned and moved as fast as I could. By the time I got out of the woods, I locked my car doors and called the police. When they finally arrived, they told me I shouldn't stick around there. I didn't need to be told twice. I left that night. The craziest part of all this, in my opinion, was the hallucinations. I didn't think such vivid hallucinations were even possible. It will be a long time before I go hiking again, and I can confidently say that when I do, I won't be alone. I would advise anyone planning to hike the Pacific Crest Trail to be extremely cautious and carry a firearm. This experience is something I still think about often. Prepare yourself for the literal terror I'm about to share with you. I'm not sure if this is the right place for a story like this, but I can't think of anywhere else to talk about it, and I just need to get it out. I've told this to everyone, my family, my neighbors, my friends, even random media outlets. It's never enough. I can't explain it well, but I feel a strange obligation to inform as many people as possible about what's been happening to me. It's October 2021 as I write this, but the story goes back more than 10 years. I can't tell you the exact year from memory, but let's say it was 2010, maybe 2011. I was in my 20s, with a stable job and a girlfriend who is now my fiancée. I never went to college, so I had been working for a while, and it was unlikely my life would experience a drastic change. Therefore, there was no reason to move far from home, so I didn't. Back then, my girlfriend and I had just moved into my childhood home, which my parents had kindly passed on to me as my first house. It's a very old brick house that my father inherited from his parents when he was about 45, so it would stay in the family. The house has undergone some renovations, but you can still tell it's old. The bricks give it away. There are very few brick houses in our area, so it stands out quite a bit. I like that. It feels special. We live in a very wooded neighborhood, so the houses are quite spaced apart. Our house is also the last lot on our street, so instead of bordering the forest on just one side, we border it on two. The forest behind is huge, and when I was a kid, my siblings and I used to explore it, but we never managed to map it out completely. I'm sure some people would find that intimidating, but I've always enjoyed nature, so it wasn't a big deal for me. My girlfriend and I had been living there for a few months when all this started happening. It was sometime in the winter. I don't remember the exact month, I just know there was snow on the ground. It was after 9 in the morning on a Sunday, the only day of the week I could sleep in a bit. As I got into my truck to treat myself to a coffee, as I do every Sunday morning, I noticed something strange in the driveway right next to my car. There was what looked like a trail of footprints in the snow. My first thought was that my girlfriend had gotten up before me without me hearing and had gone out to the driveway for some reason. But the more I looked, the more I realized that was impossible. The trail crossed my front yard and went through a hole in the side fence, meaning the footprints originated somewhere in the forest. Also, the trail didn't lead toward our house, which meant they couldn't have been made by my girlfriend. I remember standing there, completely confused. The trail didn't circle our house or approach any of the windows. It just went to the driver's door of my car. That meant someone had walked directly from the forest to my car, only to immediately turn around and head back into the forest. It was strange. I ended up asking my girlfriend about it later that day, but obviously, she wasn't responsible. I wish I could give you more details about that first incident, but it was so long ago that that's all I remember. At least 2 winters must have passed after that when the next thing happened. I specifically remember it was in 2015 because that was the year my Seahawks lost the Super Bowl to Tom Brady. I woke up that morning and walked to my car. I think it was a weekday, but I'm not sure. As soon as I stepped outside, I instantly knew something was very, very wrong. There were footprints everywhere, in the driveway, near all the windows, around the perimeter of the house. The yard was completely covered with them. I'm a pretty calm person, so I'm not going to say I started to panic, but I'd be lying if I said I was completely calm at that moment. I was already late for work, so I didn't have time to inspect the footprints closely, but I didn't want to leave my girlfriend in a potentially dangerous situation. I quickly ran around the house and yard to make sure no one was lurking on the property. However, that was all I could do with the limited time I had before leaving the driveway. I texted my girlfriend about the situation so she wouldn't be alarmed. I ended up leaving work early that day, mainly because I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. When I got home, my girlfriend had made some shocking discoveries. As soon as I arrived, she called me to the yard and pointed to one of the trails, saying it had been bothering her all day. At first, I was confused, but then I realized what she was talking about. None of the footprints had shoe marks. I felt like an idiot for not noticing it before. Whoever left the footprints had been walking barefoot. I was speechless. Who on earth would walk barefoot in such cold temperatures? My girlfriend suggested it might be some kind of animal, but the footprints genuinely looked like human feet. We went inside and called my father, but he said he had never experienced anything like that in all his years living in that house. He advised me to take my rifle and try to track whoever had left the footprints. I really didn't want to do it, but I knew it was my responsibility. My girlfriend wanted to call the police, but I knew it would be a waste of time. We had no evidence that a crime had been committed, and I didn't think simple trespassing warranted a search. I told her I would call the police if I found anything in the woods, and she agreed. As I mentioned before, that forest is a world of its own, so I told myself I would return as soon as the sun started to set. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and headed into the woods. I must have been following the trail for about 26 minutes when I noticed something really strange. Suddenly, the trail split into 2 diverging paths. I didn't know which one to follow. I didn't even know that was possible. I thought maybe whoever left the trail had doubled back to confuse me, but then a more terrifying thought hit me. Were there more than one person out there? I had been under the impression that I was tracking a single person the whole time. The possibility of multiple people had never crossed my mind. That was enough to unsettle me, though I didn't feel completely comfortable knowing I might be outnumbered. I stood there a bit longer before deciding to turn back, as it was getting dark. As I returned, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. I felt like I would have noticed if two people were trying to walk in the same footprints. There was no way the person behind could do it without messing up at least once. Then I thought maybe someone had walked backward from deep in the woods to make it seem like there were two people there the whole time. And obviously, there was the possibility it was just one person who had retraced their own steps. Maybe someone had been carrying another person on their back and just got tired. I really didn't know which explanation was the most disturbing. We ended up calling the police that night, but as I predicted, they told us they couldn't do much without definitive evidence of a crime. I told my girlfriend I would go into the woods again the next morning, but it snowed quite a bit that night, so there were no more footprints to follow. My girlfriend was obviously terrified, but there was literally nothing we could do. Fortunately, that was the last thing that happened that winter. In fact, nothing happened for a few years after that. I could say we had almost forgotten about the whole thing. A lot had happened since then. My girlfriend and I got engaged during that time and were focused on other things. I wouldn't be writing this if the story ended there. What I'm about to tell you happened less than a year ago. It was right after New Year's, in January of this year. One morning, I woke up and found footprints all over my property. At that moment, all the memories came rushing back. My fiancée broke down in our bedroom, asking me if we could ever escape this nightmare. I didn't know what to tell her, and this time it was even worse. There were footprints leading to my shed, and several tools were missing. God knows what else those people might have done. I was furious. I called my friend Jake, explained the situation, and asked for his help. Jake is a big nature lover, and a much more experienced hunter than I am, which is why I asked him to come with me. He agreed and arrived at my house a few hours later. My fiancée was very worried, but I promised her that Jake and I could handle ourselves. We dressed for the cold and prepared, knowing we might be out there for hours. I wasn't worried about the darkness this time because Jake had a very expensive thermal scope for his AR-10, which would allow us to see in low visibility. I had never spent that much on hunting gear, so I would still be blind, but at least one of us could see. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was pretty scared when we set out. At first, Jake and I talked as we walked, but after an hour, we were mostly silent. It's like the seriousness of the situation hit us both at the same time. I remember praying that I hadn't dragged Jake into a horrible situation. I'm not sure how long we walked after that, but eventually the footprints split again into two sets. We followed the left one for a few minutes, but at one point, the trail just abruptly stopped. We backtracked to the fork, and Jake commented that whoever left the footprints really didn't want to be followed. I didn't want to think about that, so we followed the footprints in silence. I'm not kidding. There were at least 3 more dead ends that forced us to backtrack, losing valuable daylight. I remember thinking how incredible it was that someone could walk backwards so perfectly, that a trail of footprints didn't look like it had been stepped on multiple times. Jake pointed out that the dead ends probably meant we were following a single person. Eventually, it started to get dark. We were deep in the woods at that point. I didn't recognize my surroundings at all. The footprints didn't split for a good while after that. Jake said whoever we were following had probably stopped trying to create dead ends. Another 5 minutes passed, and the footprints started to get noticeably deeper. We were getting closer. At one point, another set of footprints appeared right next to the original. Jake cursed and whispered that he had been wrong and that we were probably following 2 people. The sun was almost set by then, so Jake was checking his scope from time to time. The snow gave me some visibility, but to be honest, I probably would have turned back if it weren't for Jake's scope. We were walking in complete silence when, suddenly, I felt Jake's arm against my chest, signaling me to stop. I looked at him, and he was staring intently through his scope. I couldn't see what he saw, so I kept watching him. He seemed to be holding his breath. I had never seen him so still. After a good 20 seconds, he slowly moved to the nearest tree and crouched down. I followed him without questioning why. He looked through his scope again, and I could see his hand starting to tremble slightly. Another 20 seconds of complete silence. I was dying of suspense, so I gave him a light tap on the shoulder. He lowered his rifle and handed it to me silently. I looked through the scope and had to stifle a gasp. There were 4 figures huddled in the snow. At first, I thought they were bears, but I quickly realized they weren't. They were human beings. 2 of them were large and hunched, and the other 2 were smaller. The smaller ones clung to a nearby tree, moving their heads wildly. They were eating something. I couldn't make out faces or details. Thermal scopes don't give you that, but I could see enough to know they were naked. It was the most terrifying thing I've seen with my own eyes. Eventually, the larger ones lifted the smaller ones from the tree and placed them on their shoulders. Then they began to walk deeper into the forest. Jake and I stayed under that tree for what felt like an hour. We didn't dare move until we were sure there was no way those things could hear us. When we finally returned to the house hours later, I was surprised to find my fiancée still awake. She said she couldn't sleep knowing I was out there, and asked what we had found. I told her with as little detail as possible, but she was still horrified. We called the police that night, who told us they would search the forest first thing in the morning. Jake agreed to stay the night so we could both help the police with their search the next day. The next morning, the police searched the forest with our help, but they called off the search after a few hours due to the partially covered tracks. My fiancé demanded they continue searching, but they said they couldn't authorize a massive search for some missing tools. I don't blame them, but I didn't feel that it closed the matter. Jake and I knew what we had seen. Winter is approaching quickly, and both my fiancé and I are worried that those people will return. We are seriously considering moving, but we haven't been able to make progress on that. I don't really know what to think. As I mentioned before, I've told everyone about what's been happening to us. It's literally been going on for years. None of my neighbors have experienced anything like this, which doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why my house is being targeted, what those people want. Some of my friends think they're not dangerous, but others tell me I'm in grave danger. I think I'll try to fence off my yard to isolate it from the forest, but I don't know what else to do besides that. I hope we can move soon. I apologize in advance if I make any mistakes in the details of the story I'm about to tell. It's something my best friend recounted to me several times years ago. It's one of those unsettling stories you can't forget, even after hearing it more than once. My friend's father was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of felling giant trees and cutting them into specific lengths. His job involved long and exhausting hours, often alone in the deep, isolated forests of the Sierra Nevada. The way his logging crew worked was that they were paid based on the number of trees they cut, rather than the hours worked. Because of this, he often pushed himself to work 12 to 15 hours a day to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his partner completed their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the fallen trees and transport them to the mill. He spent about half of his time working alone, and the other half with his friend Ryan, another saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when working on opposite ends of the same job site. A few years ago, my friend's father and Ryan were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 4 weeks to clear a path wide enough for their trucks and equipment to reach the site. By the time they started working, they were in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They had been there for 14 days, making good progress, when they started hearing strange conversations on their radios. At first, the voices were muffled, just static-laden murmurs that made no sense. They tried changing channels, but no matter what they did, the conversations followed them. Anyone who has used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for someone to follow you when you change channels. As they moved further up the mountain, the voices became clearer. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could make out, both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments was odd. My friend's father said it sometimes sounded almost casual, but the content was unintelligible. They also began to find strange signs that people had been there before them: random containers, footprints in the dirt, and small makeshift camps. As I mentioned before, they were in such a remote place that it was practically inaccessible, so these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been there. One day, Ryan found a hidden tent just off a trail and called my friend's father. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and crude drawings of children being abused. There were even photos of a fresh apple, indicating that whoever owned it had been there recently. Ryan wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but my friend's father, always a workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night, they sat in the trailer, unable to shake the fear that enveloped them. The radio came to life again, and this time they could make out fragments of a conversation between two men. They talked about mundane things, like gathering water and firewood, but the realization that these men were probably connected to the tent scared my friend's father. Ryan wasn't as affected, but my friend's father was losing his composure. The next night, my friend's father decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering brush for a fire, he took the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unsettling than the conversations. Ryan woke my friend's father by whispering that someone was outside the trailer. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of crunching footsteps on the gravel. He reached for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded, and he had no idea where the ammunition was. Ryan was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was ridiculous given their location. They both froze as they heard the trailer door handle move. The door creaked open but didn't open fully. The trailer was elevated off the ground, and there was no ladder or step stool to climb up. Then came the scratching, long and deliberate, along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, my friend's father nodded to Ryan, signaling that he was going to investigate. He moved silently toward the door, holding a flashlight in his trembling hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open, and he was struck in the face with a knife. The pain was blinding, and he fell out of the trailer, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared and began kicking him repeatedly in the head. Without hesitation, Ryan jumped out of the trailer and tackled the man with the knife. The second man fled into the darkness, and the man Ryan had tackled got up and followed, disappearing into the forest. Ryan helped my friend's father back to the truck, and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. He was in bad shape, his face a bloody mess, and there was a cut on his eyes so severe that it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, when the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their co-workers was found tied up, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's father struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder. His right eye, with its misshapen pupil, is a constant reminder of that night. I'm sure he hasn't had a restful night's sleep since then. I've been terrified of deep forests for a long time, mainly because of my friend's father's experience. I haven't heard from my friend or his father in years, so I can only hope he's doing okay.